Before the story begins, please note that it explores meaningful themes of family, humanity, and personal responsibility. This content is intended to encourage thoughtful reflection. If you feel unprepared for these themes, you may wish to pause before continuing. The rain pounded relentlessly against the large windows of the upscale Oakwood Grill restaurant, blurring the city. Lights, as if they were watercolor tears on a gray canvas. Inside, the atmosphere was warm, vibrant, and cruelly exclusive. Barbara, an 80-year-old woman whose elegance couldn't quite hide the fragility of her posture, stood before the maitre d's podium. She wore her best navy blue velvet dress, a pearl necklace that had belonged to her mother, and a handbag that trembled imperceptibly between her gloved fingers. She had rehearsed this moment all week, walking in with her head held high, asking for a table for one, and celebrating that, against all odds, she had reached 8 decades of life. However, reality was proving to be much harsher than her imagination. The young man in charge of reservations wouldn't even look her in the eye. He checked his tablet with a mechanical disdain, ignoring the silent plea of an old woman who just didn't want to dine alone on her most important night. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but without a reservation, it's impossible to seat you tonight. We are fully booked," employee repeated for the 3rd time. He said it with that tone of voice young people use when they think an elderly person doesn't understand the rules of the modern world. Barbara felt the heat rise to her cheeks, not from the cold of the street, but from the stinging shame of feeling invisible. A nuisance amidst everyone else's joy. She looked around the room, couples toasting, groups of friends laughing, families celebrating. Everyone seemed to have a place in the world, and assigned space where they were welcome and loved. She, on the other hand, with her immense fortune, accumulated after years of running a manufacturing empire with an iron fist, couldn't buy the one thing she really needed that night: company. And a little bit of dignity. Loneliness, she thought bitterly. It's the only price money can't negotiate when time runs out. Barbara nodded slowly, swallowing the lump forming in her throat. She wasn't going to make a scene. Her old money upbringing and her pride wouldn't allow it. "I understand, young man. Thanks anyway," she murmured with a broken voice, turning on her heels to face the revolving door and the rainy night waiting for her again. She felt ridiculous. Who was she trying to fool? She had pushed everyone in her life away with her demands and coldness, prioritizing success over affection. And now, destiny was handing her the bill in a crowded restaurant. As she took the first step toward the exit, feeling her legs weigh like lead, a crystalline, childish laugh cut through the murmur of the place. It was a pure sound, full of life, that made her stop by inertia, as if seeking one last trace of human warmth before returning to her empty, silent penthouse overlooking Central Park. A few meters from the entrance, at a round table near the window, were a young man and a little girl. He, whom we'll call Daniel, must have been in his mid-30s. He wasn't dressed with the opulence of the other diners. He wore a simple corduroy jacket and a white shirt without a tie, but his face radiated a quiet kindness. Little Lucy, about 7 years old, had messy hair and big, curious eyes that sparkled with intelligence. Both of them had stopped eating. Daniel held his fork in midair, but his attention was glued to the entrance, watching the heartbreaking scene of Barbara being turned away. There was no mockery in his gaze, nor indifference. There was a deep recognition, an empathy, that only those who have known pain firsthand possess. Daniel put down his fork, wiped his mouth with his napkin, and looked at his daughter, who nodded with a seriousness beyond her years. Barbara already had her hand resting on the cold metal of the door when she felt someone watching her. It is that sixth sense you never lose, the feeling of being the center of someone's attention. She turned slightly, expecting to see the maitre d' watching to make sure she left quickly so as not to make the entrance look bad. But it wasn't him. Her tired eyes met Daniel's warm gaze. The man raised his right hand and gave her a clear, slow, and respectful signal. It wasn't a goodbye gesture or a casual wave. He was beckoning her to come over. Barbara frowned in confusion. Did she know him? Impossible. She had been a recluse for years, retired from public life. He was making fun of her. The paranoia of old age. That voice that tells you everyone looks at you with pity began whispering to her to run, not to expose herself to more humiliation. However, Daniel insisted. He stood up, which in itself was an act of chivalry, almost extinct, and walked a few steps toward her, dodging a waiter with a tray full of glasses. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said, in a smooth baritone voice that calmed Barbara's nerves a little. "My daughter and I couldn't help but hear and see what happened. This table is for 4, and there are only 2 of us. It would be an honor for us if you joined us for dinner. It is raining too hard outside for you to leave without a bite to eat." Barbara froze. The offer was so unexpected, so genuinely kind, that her brain took a few seconds to process it. She looked at the man, searching for some sign of a trick, some hidden camera, something, to justify such generosity in such a selfish world. But she only saw sincerity and dark eyes that felt strangely familiar. I wouldn't want to be a bother, young man," Barbara stammered, clutching her purse like a shield. "It is a family dinner. I don't want to be an intruder. Besides, today is... well, never mind." She stopped herself before confessing it was her birthday. She didn't want pity. Daniel smiled, and that smile lit up his tired face. "Precisely because it is a family dinner. We are missing a grandma at the table," he joked gently, lightening the mood. "Lucy, my daughter, says you look like a fairy tale queen with that necklace, and you don't leave a queen standing at the entrance. Please join us. The food here is delicious, but the portions are huge, and we need help." The mention of the little. The girl softened the steel armor Barbara had built around her heart for decades. She looked toward the table and saw little Lucy waving at her with her small hand, flashing a radiant, toothless smile. Barbara felt her eyes misting, up and blinked rapidly to stop a tear. A tear would ruin her flawless makeup. It had been years, perhaps decades, since anyone had made her feel needed, even if it was just to help finish a plate of food. She took a hesitant step toward them, and then another. The maitre d', observing the scene with disbelief from his podium, opened his mouth to protest, probably to say that sharing a table with strangers is not allowed, but a withering glare from Daniel silenced him. Daniel offered his arm to Barbara, just as a gentleman from another era would have done. As she took it, Barbara noticed the sleeve of his jacket was worn at the elbow, a detail that showed that this man worked hard for every penny, which made his invitation even more valuable. He didn't have money to spare, but he had heart to spare. Hey, let's take a quick pause here. Friends of Tales of Kindness, it is incredible how a simple gesture can change a person's day or even their life. Barbara was about to go home, to cry on her birthday, and now she is being escorted like a queen by a stranger. I want to ask you something important. Have you ever felt invisible or rejected in a public place? Or have you been someone's Daniel? I would love to read your stories in the comments and know which part of the world you are joining us from today. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the ending of this story. Upon arriving at the table, Lucy did a little hop in her chair. "Hi, I like your pearls," said the little girl, with that brutal and charming honesty of childhood. Barbara smiled, a genuine smile that took 10 years off her face. "Thank you, little one. They're called Lucy, just like you. Well, they give light," Barbara said, surprised by her own clumsiness. Daniel pulled out the chair for her to sit across from the girl. As she settled in and saw the faces of her hosts under the warm glow of the lamp, Barbara felt a shiver run down her back. There was something in the shape of the little girl's eyes and the arch of her eyebrows that hit her memory like a hammer. She couldn't pinpoint what it was, but she felt a magnetic connection that was almost painful. "What is your name, young man?" Barbara asked, trying to maintain her composure while her heart beat wildly. "Daniel," he replied, pouring her a glass of water. "And this is Lucy. We're celebrating that I got a new job today. And now we're celebrating that we have new company." The dinner began with an initial shyness that soon dissolved thanks to Lucy's spontaneity. The girl chattered about her drawings and her school with a contagious joy that filled the empty silences. Barbara, who had been accustomed for years to dining with the soul, sound of her own breathing or the news in the background, was surprised to find herself genuinely laughing for the first time in decades. Between bites of her lobster bisque, Barbara felt she had to be honest with these strangers who had welcomed her. "You know," she said, resting her spoon on the plate and lowering her gaze to the white tablecloth. "I don't usually go out alone. In fact, today is a special date. I'm turning 80 years old." The confession came out in a whisper, loaded with a vulnerability that frightened her. Admitting it out loud, her earlier loneliness seemed even more pathetic. But it also made Daniel and Lucy's company feel like a priceless gift. The reaction was immediate and heartwarming. Lucy gasped with excitement and started clapping her little sauce-stained hands. "Daddy, it's a birthday! We have to sing!" the little girl exclaimed. Daniel grinned broadly and, without hesitation, signaled discreetly to the waiter. "Please bring the best dessert you've got and put a candle on it. We have a lot to celebrate." Barbara felt a lump in her throat, but this time it wasn't from sadness, but from overwhelming gratitude. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, her voice trembling as she looked Daniel in the eye. "You don't even know my last name. I could be a grumpy, nasty old woman." Daniel shrugged with that calm demeanor only kind-hearted men possess. "Because no one should blow out their candles alone, ma'am. And because my mother always used to say that a shared table tastes better than a solitary banquet." The mention of his mother caused a fleeting shadow to cross Daniel's face. Barbara, her instincts, sharpened by years of reading people in the business world, noticed it immediately. "Your mother must be a very wise woman to have raised you this way," she commented, testing the waters. Daniel nodded, taking a sip of the cheap house wine. She passed away a few months ago. She was a tireless fighter. She raised me on her own, working in other people's homes, scrubbing floors, and taking care of other people's kids just so I could get an education." Barbara felt an uncomfortable pang in her stomach. The story felt vaguely familiar, a common narrative in her world of servants and masters. But there was something in Daniel's tone, in the dignity with which he spoke of poverty, that unsettled her deeply. "And your father?" Barbara asked, driven by a curiosity that went beyond mere politeness. Daniel shook his head as he cut a piece of steak for Lucy. "I never met him. My mother never wanted to talk about him. She just said he was a youthful mistake, someone from a very different world than ours, who didn't have the courage to stay." Barbara studied the profile of Daniel's face under the restaurant's golden light, the shape of his nose, the line of his jaw. Suddenly, a memory from 35 years ago hit her like a freight train. That jawline was identical to her own son, Rogers, who had died in a car accident a decade ago. The resemblance was so chilling that Barbara had to grip the edge of the table to keep from fainting. It couldn't be. It was an impossible coincidence. "What is your last name, son?" Barbara asked, trying to make her voice sound casual, even though she was trembling on the inside. "Taylor," he replied. "Daniel Taylor." Barbara's world stopped dead. The clinking of silverware, the laughter of other diners, the rain outside. Everything faded away. Taylor, the last name of Ellen Taylor, the young maid who had worked in her mansion over 3 decades ago. The very same girl, Barbara, had fired on the spot when she found out she was pregnant, accusing her of immorality and of trying to trap her son, Roger. Barbara remembered handing her an envelope stuffed with cash and threatening her to disappear, ensuring she'd never tarnish the family name. Ellen had left in tears, swearing the baby was a child of love. But Barbara, in her snobbish pride, hadn't wanted to listen. Barbara looked at Daniel with a fresh sense of horror. She wasn't having dinner with a kind stranger. She was dining with her own grandson, the secret son she herself had erased from family history to avoid a scandal. And that little girl, Lucy, those big, expressive eyes. They were Roger's eyes. The guilt, cold and heavy as a tombstone, crashed down on the old woman's shoulders. She had spent the last few years mourning the death of her only son and the lack of heirs, while her own blood, alive and struggling, had been scraping by just a few miles from her luxurious penthouse. She felt filthy, unworthy of sitting at that table, unworthy of eating the bread that this man, whom she had, condemned to poverty before he was even born, was offering her with such generosity. "Is something wrong, ma'am? You've gone ghostly pale," Daniel asked with concern, leaning in toward her. Barbara shook her head, unable to get a single word out. Daniel, mistaking her silence for fatigue or sadness, kept talking to distract her. I know life is hard. My mother, Ellen, went through a lot. There was a time we lived in a windowless room because a rich lady kicked her out onto the street without paying what she owed, just because she was pregnant with me. But she never held a grudge. She always told me, Daniel, never lose hope, because resentment is a poison that only kills the one carrying it. She taught me to be a man, not with money, but with values. Every word felt like a slap in Barbara's face. That rich lady was her, and the woman she had destroyed had raised a better man than anyone Barbara had ever known in her social circle. The waiter arrived with a small chocolate cake topped with a lonely candle, singing a quiet, discreet, happy birthday. Lucy was clapping enthusiastically, and Daniel was smiling warmly. Barbara stared at the candle flame dancing fragilely before her eyes. She should be happy, but she felt like she was drowning. She wanted to scream, to beg for forgiveness on her knees, to tell Daniel, "It's me. I'm the witch from your mother's story. I'm your grandmother." But fear paralyzed her. How would he react? He would surely hate her. He would surely grab Lucy and leave, abandoning her forever. And this time, the loneliness would be deserved and eternal. So she did the only thing her cowardice allowed her to do in that moment. She closed her eyes, made a silent wish for redemption, and blew out the candle, enveloping the table in a small cloud of sweet smoke. "Yay!" shouted Lucy. Daniel cut the cake and served the biggest slice to Barbara. "I hope you wished for something good," he said. Barbara tasted the cake. It tasted like ash to her guilt-ridden tongue, but she forced herself to swallow it. "Daniel," she began, her voice as steady as she could manage. "You mentioned you got a new job. What do you do for a living?" She needed to know more. She needed to find a way to fix the damage without revealing who she was just yet. "I'm a carpenter. A cabinet maker, to be exact," he replied proudly, though then his expression turned a bit gloomy. "Well, I was. The shop where I worked closed down. My new job is actually temporary work at a construction site, hauling sacks of cement. It pays less and is hard on my back. But I need to save up. I want to open my own shop someday, so Lucy never goes without." Barbara clutched her purse under the table. There was her chance. Barbara took a breath, knowing she had to tread carefully. If she offered him money directly, Daniel's pride, that same dignified pride she saw in his eyes, would make him refuse it. She had to be smarter. "Daniel," she said, pulling a small notebook from her designer bag. "What a coincidence. I own an old brownstone in Brooklyn that's been closed up for years. I need the library and the main staircase restored. And modern carpenters just want to use particle board and plastic. I need a real cabinet maker, someone who respects the wood. Would you be interested in taking a look? I'll pay a fair price, of course." Daniel's eyes widened in surprise. "Really, ma'am? I don't have my workshop set up yet. I work with basic tools. Tools don't make the master, son. It's the hands," Barbara interrupted firmly. "Write down your number for me here." Daniel wrote his phone number on a paper napkin with a pen borrowed from the waiter, since he didn't have business cards. He handed it to Barbara with a mix of hope and shyness. When the bill arrived, Barbara motioned to pull out her gold credit card, but Daniel was faster and placed his hand on the table. "Don't even think about it, Barbara. Today is your birthday, and you are my guest. I won't take no for an answer." Barbara felt her heart shrink. She knew that dinner would probably cost what Daniel earned in 2 days of hard labor hauling cement. "But Daniel, this is an expensive place," she tried to protest. "Money comes and goes, ma'am. Memories stay. Let me have the pleasure," he insisted, with a smile that allowed no argument. Barbara watched in silence, with a sharp pain in her chest, as Daniel pulled out a worn wallet and counted out crumpled small bills to cover the total and leave a decent tip. She saw how he calculated mentally, probably subtracting something from his weekly expenses to afford that gesture of kindness. She, who had millions in the bank and who used to complain if her coffee wasn't the perfect temperature, felt tiny before the greatness of this humble man. She realized that true class wasn't in last names or bank accounts, but in the ability to give what you can't spare. Ellen, Daniel's mother, had done an exceptional job raising a gentleman, while she, with all her resources, hadn't known how to value people. They left the restaurant. The rain had stopped, leaving a smell of wet asphalt and clean air. "Well, Barbara, it's been an honor," said Daniel. Little Lucy ran over to the old woman and hugged her legs tight. "Happy birthday, Grandma Barbara," the little girl shouted. The physical contact completely disarmed the old woman. Her knees actually shook. She crouched down with difficulty and stroked her great-granddaughter's cheek, fighting back tears. "Thank you, my dear. That was the best gift I could ask for." Just then, a luxurious black car with a chauffeur pulled up right in front of them. The uniformed driver got out quickly to open the back door. "Madam Barbara, apologies for the delay," the chauffeur said. Daniel and Lucy stared at the car, jaw dropped. Barbara saw the shock in her grandson's eyes. He didn't know she was wealthy. He just thought she was an elegant older lady. You have a chauffeur?" Daniel asked, looking a bit intimidated and taking a step back. Barbara silently cursed her. Usual display of wealth, but she recovered quickly. "It's just a car service I use sometimes because of my age. Son, don't worry about it. Call me tomorrow about the house project. Good night." She got into the car quickly before she had to explain anything else and closed the door. As the car pulled away, Barbara looked out the back window and saw Daniel and Lucy waving goodbye under the light of a street lamp. Two small figures in a massive city. Barbara leaned back into the leather seat, took out her phone, and dialed a number, ignoring how late it was. "I want you to prepare the papers for the Willow House," she ordered her lawyer with a firm voice. "And I want you to find the best woodworking machinery on the market. We start renovations tomorrow." The next morning, Daniel called the number on the napkin. He half expected it to be a false alarm, or for the old lady to have forgotten her promise. But Barbara picked up on the very first ring. She gave him the address of an old brownstone in Brooklyn, a property Barbara had bought as an investment that was basically abandoned. When Daniel arrived with his old pickup truck and basic tools, he found Barbara waiting for him at the door, dressed in simpler clothes so she wouldn't intimidate him. "Welcome, Daniel. Come in, please," she told him. As he walked in, Daniel was amazed. The high ceilings, the wood moldings, the majestic, though dusty, staircase. It was a woodworker's dream. This is incredible," he whispered, running his hand along an oak banister. "The job is yours if you want it," Barbara said, watching him with hidden affection. "But I have conditions. First, I want you to restore this wood as if it were for your own home. Second, I need you to buy new tools. I don't want you ruining this wood with old saws." Daniel lowered his head, ashamed. "Ma'am, I appreciate the opportunity, but I don't have the capital to invest in machinery right now. I can barely make ends meet." Barbara smiled. It was the smile of a mischievous grandmother enjoying her plan. "Don't worry about that. I'll put up the initial capital as an advance on the job. You provide the labor and the talent. It's a deal." Daniel looked at her as if he were looking at an angel. He didn't know he was looking at his grandmother, trying to pay back a debt that could never really be paid. The days that followed were a whirlwind of activity. Barbara, who used to spend her days bored to death in board meetings or playing bridge, was now heading to the construction site every single day. She'd sit in a folding chair with a thermos of coffee and watch Daniel work, watching him plane the wood, measuring with millimeter precision, and treating every piece with such respect. It just confirmed to her that he had artist's blood running through his veins. Sometimes Lucy would come by after school and sit on the floor drawing, filling that old house with laughter. Barbara took advantage of those moments to play with her, read her stories, and, subtly, buy her new clothes or give her toys she'd kept stored away since her own son was little. She was building the memories she'd missed out on for 30 years. However, keeping the secret was getting harder and harder. One day, while they were sharing sandwiches on a break, Daniel asked a question that made Barbara's blood run cold. "Mrs. Barbara, you mention your son a lot, the one who owned these toys. Where is he now? I never see him visiting you." Barbara felt the weight of the lie stuck in her throat. She stared at an imaginary photo on the empty wall. "He left a long time ago, Daniel. I made mistakes with him. I was harsh, demanding. I thought success was the only thing that mattered, and I lost him." Her eyes filled with real tears. Daniel, always empathetic, put a hand on her shoulder. "We all make mistakes, Barbara. My mother always used to say that, as long as we're alive, there's still time to fix things. Maybe he'll forgive you, wherever he is. Barbara had to bite her lip to keep from screaming at him. You are him. You are what's left of him. The restoration work at the Willow House brownstone was almost finished. Under Daniel's expert hands, the old oak wood had regained its majestic golden shine, transforming the ruin into a warm, cozy home. Barbara looked at the result with a pride that swelled in her chest, not just for the beauty of the place, but for her grandson's undeniable talent. That day she was carrying in her purse a newly drafted legal document, the deeds to the house. She had decided to transfer the property to Daniel Taylor as a final payment for his services, an early inheritance disguised as a work bonus. She knew it was risky. She knew he'd be suspicious of such generosity, but her health was failing, and the urgency to secure Lucy and Daniel's future weighed more than her fear of being found out. Barbara felt ready to take the step, never imagining that fate would get there first. It was a stormy afternoon, a lot like the night they first met. Barbara and Daniel were in the library, going over the final details of the shelving. Lucy was playing on the rug with an old music box Barbara had given her. Suddenly, Barbara felt a wave of intense dizziness, brought on by her blood pressure and the nerves of the moment. She stumbled and had to grab onto a table for support, knocking her purse to the floor in the process. The contents scattered all over the polished wooden floor. Keys, her coin purse, her pills, and an old leather wallet that popped open when it hit the ground. Daniel rushed over to help her. "Barbara, are you okay?" he asked, alarmed, helping her sit down in an armchair. Yes, just an old lady dizzy spell, son. Don't be scared," she replied, trying to catch her breath. While Daniel went to get a glass of water, little Lucy, always helpful, started picking things up from the floor. "I'll help you, Grandma Barbara," the little girl said sweetly. She picked up the lipstick, the keys, and the open wallet. As she picked it up, a black and white photograph slid out of a secret compartment in the wallet. It was a photo worn down by time and kisses, showing a handsome young man of about 20 smiling in front of a sports car. Lucy stood there staring at the photo, furrowing her brow with that unfiltered childhood curiosity. When Daniel came back with the water, the little girl handed him the photo. "Look, Daddy, this man has your same face, but he's wearing Prince clothes. Is that you when you were little?" Daniel, with the glass of water in one hand, took the photo with the other, smiling at his daughter's funny idea. "No, my love, I never had clothes He swallowed hard. The smile froze on his lips. He looked at the image and felt the ground disappear beneath his feet. The man in the photo was his spitting image, an almost exact copy of himself, but with a more carefree, wealthy look. Daniel turned the photo over with trembling hands. On the back, in elegant, old-fashioned handwriting, it was written, "To my beloved son, Roger, 1985. Roger. The name echoed in Daniel's head like a cannon shot. His mother, in her feverish moments before dying, had whispered that name with a mixture of love and infinite pain. "Roger," whispered Daniel, feeling a sudden wave of nausea. Barbara, who had already recovered a bit from her dizzy spell, saw the photo in Daniel's hands and went deadly pale. She tried to get up to snatch it away, but her legs wouldn't respond. The secret she had guarded so jealously was now exposed in the palm of her grandson's hand. Daniel looked up slowly, and Barbara saw the warmth and affection that used to inhabit his dark eyes transform into confusion, and then into an icy suspicion. "Who is this man, Barbara?" Daniel asked with a voice that didn't seem like his own, a deep and trembling voice. "Tell me, why do you have a photo of a man named Roger who looks identical to me? Why did you approach us in the restaurant? This wasn't a coincidence, was it?" We're taking a critical pause at this moment of unbearable tension. Friends of Tales of Kindness, the truth has come to light in the most unexpected way. Barbara is cornered by her own past. Daniel is no fool. He's connecting the dots at breakneck speed. The pain of feeling deceived can be stronger than any gratitude. I want to ask you all, what would you do in Daniel's place? Would you feel relief at finding your roots, or fury at the deception? Comment the word truth If you believe that lies, no matter how well-intentioned, always end up causing pain, don't move, because the confrontation coming up is going to change everything. Daniel, please let me explain, begged Barbara, tears streaming down her wrinkled cheeks. I didn't want you to find out like this. Daniel took a step back, pulling Lucy away from her instinctively, as if Barbara were now a threat. Explain what? That you've been playing fairy godmother with us? My mother told me about a Roger. She told me he was a good man, but that his family, his mother, was a monster who destroyed our lives. Daniel looked at Barbara with horrified recognition. You are Barbara. Barbara Vanderbilt, the owner of the manufacturing firms. My mother worked for you. You were the one who threw her out on the street when she was pregnant with me. You are the reason my mother died working like a slave. The accusation hit Barbara harder than any physical slap. She couldn't deny it. There was no possible defense for the cruelty of her past. Yes, it's me, Barbara confessed, lowering her head, defeated. I was the one who committed that sin, Daniel, and I have lived every day of the last 30 years paying for it, in loneliness and bitterness. Roger died without knowing about you. When I saw you at the restaurant, I saw his eyes. I saw my blood. I just wanted to repair the damage, son. I just wanted to give you what is rightfully yours. Barbara took the envelope, with the deeds out of her purse, and placed it on the table with a trembling hand. This house is yours. It is for you and for Lucy. It is my way of asking for forgiveness. Daniel looked at the envelope with contempt, as if it contained poison. His breathing was heavy. His face was red with anger and pain. Do you think you can buy me with a house? He shouted, scaring Lucy, who hid behind his legs. Do you think some bricks and fine wood can pay for my mother's tears, the nights we spent in the cold, the humiliation? She died young, worn out, because you decided we weren't good enough for your last name. And now, because you feel lonely and old, you think you can come and play the charitable granny to clear your conscience. Daniel picked Lucy up in his arms tightly. I don't want your house, I don't want your money, and I definitely don't want your last name. Daniel, wait, shouted Barbara, trying to get up from the armchair, extending a desperate hand toward him. You are my grandson. Lucy is my great-granddaughter. You are the only thing I have left. But Daniel was already walking toward the door, with the firm step of a man wounded in the deepest part of his dignity. He stopped at the threshold, turned his head, and looked at her with eyes that no longer held any shine, only infinite disappointment. You have nothing, Mrs. Barbara. You have money, you have properties, you have a chauffeur. But family? You don't have family. Family takes care of each other. They aren't thrown away. Keep your restored mansion. We are going back to our poverty, where at least we sleep with a clear conscience. And with a slam of the door that resonated like a gunshot in the empty mansion, Daniel walked out of her life, taking with him the light that had barely begun to illuminate Barbara's darkness. Barbara was left alone in the immense brownstone, surrounded by the echo of the slamming door and the deathly silence that followed. She slumped into the armchair, feeling the weight of the years crash down on her all at once, crushing her. For the first time, her money was worthless. She had tried to buy Daniel's affection the same way you buy a stock on the market, and she had failed miserably. That night, Barbara didn't call her driver. She sat in the dark, staring at the wood Daniel had polished with so much love, finally understanding that the restoration her family needed wasn't for the furniture, but for their souls. She realized that forgiveness isn't signed in front of a notary. It's earned with humility and time. Two things she had never been willing to offer. 2 weeks passed. Daniel didn't come back. The work ground to a halt. Barbara took to her bed, not because of a physical illness, but from a deep sadness that drained her will to live. Her lawyer suggested suing Daniel for breach of contract to force him back, but Barbara screamed at him to leave. "No one touches my grandson," she shouted. In her solitude, Barbara grabbed a pen and paper. She didn't write a check. She wrote a letter. A long letter, stained with tears, where she didn't make excuses but stripped her soul bare. She told Daniel about the fear she felt losing Roger, about how her arrogance was just a mask to hide her insecurity. And for the first time, she admitted out loud that Ellen had been a better woman than her. because she knew how to love unconditionally. Barbara went personally to Daniel's small apartment in a modest Queens neighborhood. She didn't bring the driver. She took a taxi and walked the last few blocks under the book, scorching sun, carrying an old toolbox that had belonged to Roger when he was a boy. And the letter. She left the things in front of Daniel's door, rang the bell, and hid behind a staircase, not having the courage to face him. Daniel opened the door and saw the box and the envelope. As he sat in his kitchen reading the letter, Barbara's words cut deep. There was no arrogance in those lines, only the raw regret of a mother who failed, and grandmother who didn't want to die alone without knowing her own blood. Lucy, who missed the grandmother from the stories, saw her father crying silently as he read. "Daddy, is Grandma Barbara bad?" the little girl asked innocently. Daniel looked at his daughter, then at his father's toolbox that Barbara had left him. Inside was a note. "These were your father's. He wanted to build things. I forced him to study finance. Don't make my mistake. Build your own life, Daniel, with or without me, but be happy." Daniel remembered his mother Ellen's words. Resentment is a poison. He realized that if he kept hating Barbara, he'd be continuing the cycle of pain his mother wanted to break. Forgiving didn't mean forgetting the past. It meant freeing the future. Let's take one last pause before the ending. Tales of Kindness family. Forgiveness is the hardest and bravest decision a human being can make. Daniel has the right to be furious, but he has the duty, for his daughter and his mother's memory, to seek peace. Sometimes the villains in our stories are just broken people who didn't know how to do any better. Would you forgive Barbara? Type the word family in the comments if you believe blood runs deep and it's never too late to start over. Don't miss this emotional ending. The next day, Barbara was at the brownstone, getting ready to sell it. There was no point in keeping it anymore. Suddenly she heard a noise at the entrance. Firm footsteps, followed by tiny little ones. She turned around with her heart in her throat. There was Daniel in his work clothes, and Lucy, who ran to hug her without hesitation. Barbara broke down in tears, hugging the little girl. Daniel stood there, serious but calm. "I don't want the house as a gift, Barbara," he said firmly, "but I accept the job. I'll finish the restoration, and I'll charge for it. And you can come have dinner with us on Sundays. Not as the owner, but as Grandma. We'll start like that, slowly." Barbara nodded, unable to speak, accepting her grandson's conditions with a newfound humility. It was the beginning of a slow and painful reconstruction, but a steady one. Daniel finished the brownstone, which became his workshop and home. But he insisted on paying Barbara symbolic rent until he could legitimately buy it with his own work. Barbara learned to respect Daniel's boundaries. She stopped trying to control him with money and started earning his affection by just being there, taking care of Lucy when she was sick, cooking, or at least trying to cook, for them, and listening to stories about Ellen without judging, honoring her memory. Over time, the pain of the past turned into a scar that didn't hurt anymore. It only reminded them of what they had survived. Barbara used her fortune to create the Ellen Taylor Foundation, dedicated to helping single mothers with no resources. A public gesture that cleared the name of the woman she had once despised and proved to Daniel that his grandmother's change was real. She even added a creative twist by partnering with local trade schools to offer woodworking apprenticeships, ensuring skills like Daniel's could thrive in the community. The day they opened the Taylor Woodwork shop, Barbara cut the ribbon alongside Daniel and Lucy. There was no press, no high society, just the three of them, and the photo of Roger and Ellen watching over the place. Barbara lived to see Lucy graduate from elementary school and to see Daniel become the best woodworker in the city. She passed away peacefully years later, holding her grandson's hand. At her funeral, there were no empty speeches. Daniel stood before her grave and said, "My grandmother wasn't perfect. She made unforgivable mistakes. But she had the courage to spend her final years trying to fix them. And in the end, she didn't die as the owner of an empire, but as my grandma. That's the only thing that counts." This story teaches us that it's never too late to change your path, but also that forgiveness isn't a blank check. It's daily work, like carving wood, that requires patience, effort, and love. Barbara found her seat at the restaurant of life thanks to a gesture of kindness from the person she expected it from the least. And that lesson saved her from eternal loneliness. Thanks for joining us on Tales of Kindness. If this story of redemption and second chances moved you, please subscribe, share the video, and never forget that sometimes the stranger you wave over to sit with you could be the angel your life was waiting for. Until the next story.